Alright guys, here we go with Reconstruction. Analyze the impact of Reconstruction on Georgia. So in the time after the Civil War, which is when Reconstruction was, we had to reconstruct after all the devastation of the Civil War. Georgia ratifies 3 different amendments. The 13th, which bans slavery in the United States, the 14th, which gives citizenship to all born in the U.S., and the 15th, which gives all men to vote. They didn't do it all in one fall swoop, though. First, we had Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. He wanted the country to reunite quickly and easily and as smoothly as possible and just go back to being the country that it had been. So all they had to do was take an oath stating that they would be loyal to the U.S., and only 10% of the voters had to take the oath. So think about it. In your class, if there's 30 kids sitting in this room with you right now and only 10% have to take the oath, that's only 3 kids that have to take the oath. Alright? So a lot of people think this is too easy. After all the devastation and death that was caused by the Civil War, and because the South seceded, they think that it needs to be a little bit tougher. Okay? So that plan is also ended quickly because John Wilkes Booth shoots Abraham Lincoln and kills him at Ford Theater in 1865, 5 days after the end of the Civil War. So there goes the easy plan. Remember, he's at the theater watching the show. Booth shoots him and jumps onto the stage, runs away. This is his whole path of running away. He's actually eventually found and killed. Okay, there's the funeral procession, and then this is the hanging of the rest of the people that participated in the assassination. Johnson, who was the vice president, now becomes the president, and his Reconstruction plan is exactly the same as Lincoln's, but it also makes all southern states ratify the 13th Amendment. So having to take the oath and ratify the 13th Amendment, which, remember, that abolished slavery. Okay. Georgia completes all of these requirements, ratifies the 13th Amendment, but they still manage to find ways to discriminate against freedmen. Remember, freedmen is what they called the freed slaves. So Georgia comes up with these things called black law codes. These are laws that restrict the rights of freedmen. They control the employment, as in who they can work for or where they can work. They permit whippings as punishment. They can put them in imprisonment of jobless freedmen. So if a freedman isn't able to get a job, they could throw him in jail. Their labor periods, meaning when they're expected to work sunrise to sunset 6 days a week. They could not vote, serve on juries, or marry between the races. I don't know about you, but this sure sounds a whole lot like slavery did during and before the Civil War. So, Congress, remember, the legislative branch of the United States government is not happy with Georgia's black codes. They are not happy with the way freedmen are being treated. So they step up and they say, not only do you have to take your oath and ratify the 13th, now you also have to ratify the 14th Amendment, which grants citizenship to all freedmen. The South refuses to do this, so they are put on military rule. Remember, this means the military comes in, they run everything, they tell you when you're allowed to be out on the street, when you got to be at home, everything. So, as you can imagine, they do not like this a whole lot, but they're eventually readmitted because they do what has been asked of them. They allow freedmen to vote in Georgia. They give civil rights to all freedmen by ratifying the 14th Amendment, and the military leaves Georgia, right? So now that they have the right to vote, African American and black men are elected to Georgia's General Assembly. Remember, that's our legislative branch. Henry McNeil Turner, Tunis Campbell, these are some of the men right here that were elected to our General Assembly. But after this happens, after they get in there, the white Georgians declare that African Americans are allowed to vote in Georgia politics, but they cannot hold office. So they are literally kicked out of the General Assembly. 32 men. This is another way they've just been discriminated against. So they go up to Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. They want Congress to help. All right? They want some support in this fight. So Ulysses S. Grant, he's elected president in 1868. Remember, he was in charge of the Union forces during the Civil War, and when he becomes president, they are readmitted to the Georgia General Assembly. They get to go back down there and become members again. They're readmitted, allowed to participate again. Okay? So, after the Civil War, Remember, all slaves are freed. Now they're called freedmen. They're not citizens yet, but they have this thing created, the Freedmen's Bureau. It's there to help freedmen. Think of it like the American Red Cross. It's the first federal relief agency. They provide food, clothes, education, land, medical attention, all sorts of things that are needed by these people who have gone from being slaves, being owned and controlled by someone, to being free, but having no means to take care of themselves. Remember, slaves were not allowed to learn to read and write, so it's difficult to obtain an education and job without simple skills like that, alright? On the other hand, we have the Ku Klux Klan. If you remember, they are a secret organization of Southern Democrats. They are designed to scare African American Republican voters. They've had to allow African American and black people to vote legally, so this is one of the scare tactics they're going to use. They're going to threaten with lynchings. They're going to terrorize them and do anything they can to keep them from voting, to keep them from having a say. Because if they can't vote for the people they want to. The control is going back to the Democratic Party. That is the goal of the Ku Klux Klan. Okay. And they become so violent that once again Congress enforces military rule in Georgia. So we're also forced to ratify the 15th Amendment, and that gives all male citizens the right to vote. So after the military comes back in, things settle down, the KKK dies out. But as you remember, they come back later after Mary Fagan. Okay? So Georgia, end of Reconstruction. By 1871, we are taken off military rule. Things have settled down enough that they're not doing it, not needing the military in here anymore. The Supreme Court has ruled that African Americans were able to hold political office. So all those black and African American men who were elected are able to, in fact, hold their offices. Now, because of the Ku Klux Klan terrifying African American and black voters, they get voted out. There's not enough people who are willing to vote to keep them in office, but they're still allowed technically to hold office. They ratify the 3 amendments, 2 new constitutions, and they're finally readmitted as a U.S. state, and the Democrats regain control of Georgia. Okay? During this time, cotton is still a major crop. Because of the overproduction of cotton, though, because that's all Georgia was producing at that time, the economy struggles. Remember, we talked about when you have too much of one thing and there's not enough demand, the price of it goes down. So they have all this cotton, but there's just so much they can sell. So the economy is struggling greatly. So for these freedmen, these recently freed slaves, there's not a whole lot of options out there for them to be employed, to make money, to support their own families. One of the things they can do is tenant farming. It is similar to sharecropping, but the farmer owns some of the tools and equipment. They are kind of a step up from sharecroppers, and they manage to make a little bit of profit because they're not having to rent everything from the farmer, whereas sharecroppers here, they are farmers who had nothing but their labor. The landowner provides everything, land, house, tools, all on credit. So then they also have to give them a portion of the crop when they're done. So they're left in debt with no profit, struggling just to feed their families, and just year after year getting more and more and more in debt. Okay? Not very good options for these people who have just recently received their freedom.